This is an execution. This was a planned murder. The killer came into this house looking for Justin and got Justin.
A brutal killing.
Justin Michael was brutally gunned down, and Angie Verhill was unharmed. It just didn't make sense.
A dark mystery with shocking twists.
The motives could be infidelity, jealousy. Is there some type of love triangle gone bad?
He was face to face with the guy that he could say, that's the guy that took my girlfriend away from me. And maybe it just kind of picked the scab. Maybe that's when his anger toward Justin Michael began to build.
The truth will be revealed.
Most victims know their killer. You're almost always going to find a connection. There's some tie back to the victim. The key to the investigation is finding that tie.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Some 15 miles north of Des Moines, Iowa, just off the highway and down some gravel roads, lies the town of Grimes. Though if you blink, you just might miss it.
Grimes is a very small town, surrounded by nothing but farmland. You have the old brick downtown area, and then out for miles in every direction, you have farm fields.
Grimes is very quiet, has that Midwestern charm. It has low crime rate. The last violent crime was 42 years ago. Most of the crimes are property crimes, thefts, burglaries.
But then one spring night, the residents of this peaceful farming community are awoken by the sound of sirens.
911, what's your emergency?
Somebody just came in and shot my fiance in the head.
Can you go over and check the status of...
He's dead.
Okay.
I know he is.
So there's no signs of life at all?
No.
When you get a shots fired trip, especially in the Grimes area, a lot of the times it's just people doing fireworks. You get backfire from a car. We've had transformers blow. Homicide, very rarely.
When you see a lot of authorities on the scene in Grimes, Iowa, you start thinking this probably isn't just a normal crime, it's a lot more serious.
The victim is 30-year-old Justin Michael.
Justin was a good-looking, bright young man. Family and friends loved to be around him. He had a sense of adventure, a great job.
Nobody had an unkind word to say about him. He was always willing to lend a hand. Just a good guy.
Angie and Justin were engaged to be married. Angie had bought her wedding dress, so it's heartbreaking to know they were that close to the wedding and then their lives were shattered.
Tasked with investigating Justin Michael's murder is Detective Robin Bartholomew.
I was called out roughly 3:30 in the morning and was notified of a shooting. Once on scene, I observed a white male, early 30s, laying on his back in the bed. There was a significant amount of blood. He had 4 gunshot wounds, 3 to the head and 1 to the neck. The victim appeared to be gunned down in his sleep.
The person that shot Justin was clearly standing right over the top of him, shooting almost downward into his head. The bullets passed through Justin, through the pillow, through his mattress, and one of the bullets actually passed through the wall and exited the home.
Justin Michael's fiance, Angie Verhill, was laying right next to Justin Michael when he was shot. And Angie Verhill was unharmed. Angie said she was asleep in bed. She heard several shots and immediately woke and saw what appeared to be a dark figure exiting the bedroom. The description of the intruder was so vague. Average size person, unknown male or female, dressed in all dark clothing. We have no idea who we're looking for.
Detective Bartholomew must now track down Justin's killer by focusing on the last 24 hours of his life, starting with the crime scene.
Shell casings were located in the bed next to the victim. I'd never seen the shell casings before. They were Tula ammo, which I later learned is a Russian-manufactured steel casing ammo. The weapon used was a 9mm automatic.
Whenever you have a murder involving a firearm, ballistics is a very important forensic component of an investigation. Whenever you see a particular brand of ammunition show up that is atypical, that points police in the direction of a specific type of buyer. That said, the more rare a brand or a make or model of ammunition, the much smaller your potential pool of suspects, and they can be much harder to find.
Police combed through the house, looking for more clues.
It was a small, well-kept house. There was no signs of forced entry. The only thing that appeared out of order was some electronic equipment that had been pulled from an entertainment center.
Then, something unusual catches the detective's eye.
There was a piece of clothing that was left there in the living room that did not belong to anyone in the house. It was a construction yellow hoodie. I thought that was odd. In the preliminary stages of an investigation, you can't rule out a burglary gone wrong. But after examining the scene, nothing was missing from the house. The house wasn't ransacked. To me, it was a poor attempt to stage a burglary.
Staging is any attempt by an offender to create an alternate scenario, to move things around in a way to misdirect the police. Whenever you see staging at a murder scene, or any crime scene for that matter, it will often reflect the fact that the offender knows they're going to be the prime suspect. They have some personal connection to the victim. So by introducing staging, or countermeasures as we call it, it creates an alternate scenario to frame someone in particular.
It did not seem it was some type of a burglary that was taking place. It appeared that this was a targeted attack. This was somebody that came into this house looking for Justin and got Justin.
It's very unusual that someone's gonna enter a house, gun down one person, and leave witnesses.
In many cases, leaving a witness behind would have to have some other pragmatic purpose. In other cases, we see that where an offender will murder one victim because they have a very specific motive. That doesn't necessarily mean they have it in them to take the life of an innocent bystander or a witness. In reality, some killers just aren't that cold-blooded.
To get more answers, the investigators turned to the other witness at the scene, Justin's mother, Marie.
Marie Michael was in town for wedding planning purposes, so she was actually staying at the residence with Justin and Angie.
Marie was in a guest room across from Justin and Angie's room. At approximately 3:20 in the morning, she was awoken by the door opening.
Marie Michael told us the gun that was used had a laser sight on it, and she was woken up by the light shining in her eyes. She obviously was very scared, pretended to remain asleep. At one point, she took a peek, and she sees a figure in the doorway clad in all black, you know, nothing to indicate who it was. In very short order then, she heard 4 rapid gunshots.
911 calls came in by Angie Verheul and Marie Michaels at 3:22 in the morning. We were able to establish that the homicide occurred at approximately 3:20 in the morning.
But who would want to kill Justin Michael, and why?
Justin Michael was brutally gunned down, and Angie Verhill was unharmed. It just didn't make sense. It was something that was suspicious.
Angie said as soon as the shots happened, she immediately jumped up out of the bed. The fact that, she didn't get blood on her, maybe from the way the gunshots occurred, all of the splatter went opposite of where Angie was lying. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but that's incredibly unusual.
At this point, I think we need to look at what was the cause of this. Was it a coincidence? We wanted to look at Angie Verhill a little bit closer.
When one learns that Angie was sleeping right beside Justin when he was shot and there was no blood on her, she wasn't harmed, one has to think, was she in on it? How could she possibly be uninjured or unscathed as a result of this brutal attack?
When you examine crime scenes, and especially when you have blood evidence, it tells a story. And with the lack of blood on Angie Verhill, to me, that was a red flag. In these types of cases, you really want to look at the person closest to the victim. More times than not, it's going to be a significant other or a family member that is involved in the homicide. I want to take a closer look at Angie.
With suspicion swirling around Angie Verhill in the brutal killing of her fiancé Justin Michael, detectives bring her down to the station for questioning.
Angie, by virtue of being Justin's fiance and being at the crime scene unharmed, is a person of interest.
As detectives interview Angie, she's surprisingly unemotional.
Do you have any suspects on who you think would have shot Justin?
I have no idea.
One would think that you'd be completely shattered that your fiance was brutally gunned down right next to you. Angie was very calm. She wasn't upset. She wasn't crying. Her demeanor was a little suspicious.
Is there anybody in Justin's life that harbors any ill toward him?
Not that I know of.
Everyone responds differently to grief and to stress. So in order to calibrate a person's response and determine if it's suspicious or not, like we see in this case, we would have to first get to know every person of interest, their background, their habits, their associates, to understand if a theatrical response is out of character or if that's actually how they just operate day to day.
You're the closest to him.
Right.
So you've got to know something.
This was a planned murder. Angie survived the shooting. She's laying right next to Justin when it occurs. So why is she still alive? What's the motivation behind this murder?
Detectives question Angie about how she and Justin spent his last 24 hours.
The day before Justin Michael was murdered, they met for dinner at Justin Michael's sister's house. Angie said there was nothing unusual. Everything was normal. They were busy making preparations for the wedding, planning. They were happy, and they got home about 10 p.m. and went to bed approximately 11 p.m.
Detectives press Angie for more details about Justin's life.
Trying to figure out why something like this happens, you start looking at backgrounds, you start looking at all of the people that Justin knows.
Has he had any issues with anyone? No enemies?
Not that I know of.
Did you party a little bit? No drugs involvement whatsoever. Did Justin ever sell drugs?
Not that I know of.
There was no indication that Justin was involved in drugs. There was no indication that Justin was involved in gambling or any of the things of that nature.
You always want to look into, was there something in Justin's background that was the cause of this homicide? There was really nothing. And also, there was nothing noteworthy in Justin Michael's past relationships that would indicate somebody wanting to harm him.
We will do everything in our power to discover where the truth lies, nothing but the truth. And whoever's responsible for this, we need to make sure they're held accountable.
Investigators look closer at Angie's relationship with Justin Michael. They want to know if there were problems between them.
Angie had met Justin in 2013. They hit it off so well. She had moved in very quickly. She described their relationship as a great relationship. There was no stress, fights, no issues. They were both excited to get married. Angie said that their relationship was solid.
People generally don't kill people just for the sake of killing people unless they are completely deranged. Most victims know their killer. You're almost always going to find a connection. There's some tie back to the victim. The key to the investigation is finding that tie.
With Angie still in their crosshairs, investigators dig deeper into her past relationships.
During the course of Angie Verheule's interview, one of those things asked about is, who are your ex-boyfriends? Who are the people that you've been involved with that could be responsible for this? The first name she mentioned was a guy by the name of Andy Wegner.
How long did you date Andy?
About 3 years.
Andy Wagner was a funeral director here in town. He was Angie's ex-boyfriend. It was a long-term relationship, and they were pretty serious and lived together, and eventually they broke up.
How did Andy take the breakup?
He was like, well, I feel like we're getting along really well, and, it's hard for me to believe we're making the right decision. And he was like, I'm taking this a little harder than I thought I would.
At that point, Andy's a person of interest. He's somebody that is got a history with Angie, so we need to know what he's been up to, and we've got to figure out where he was, what he was doing, and see if he has any motivation to be involved in this.
When pressed on who else might have wanted to harm Justin, Angie recalls a strange incident from a few months back.
Angie had talked about an incident involving her vehicle where it was vandalized. The windshield was cracked, 3 windows were broke out, and someone had keyed her car. At the time, it was thought that kids in the neighborhood had damaged her vehicle. But after learning the amount of damage to Angie's car, it seemed very personal. The vandalized vehicle and the murder of Justin Michael could be related.
Detectives ask Angie if she has any ideas as to who might be behind the vandalism.
There was one guy that I had dated in between Andy and Justin.
She mentions that for a very brief period of time, she dated this guy named Dave.
It was not a full-on relationship.
Angie talked about meeting up with him a half a dozen times, but nothing serious. It was just more of a hookup.
According to Angie, when she ended things with Dave, he didn't take it well and sent her several angry texts.
So at that point, Dave is on our radar, but we still don't know who Dave is.
What's his Dave?
What is his last name now? I just forgot.
For a period of time, she could not remember Dave's last name.
Dave. God, I don't know why I can't think of it right now.
I thought that was odd. We were trying to ask more details or something that would help her remember Dave's last name. As we pressed forward, out of the blue, she comes up with
Moffett.
Moffett, M-O-F-F-I-T-T?
I can't remember if it's 2 T's or just one.
We already had Andy Wegner's name, so we're running a criminal history check. We're doing those things with Andy Wegner, but now Dave Moffett is somebody that we need to see what's going on. And then Angie said David and Justin had worked together at Wells Fargo.
And what's even weirder is that he ended up working in Justin's department.
Wells Fargo is a huge company. I mean, 10,000+ employees in Polk County. And by pure happenstance, David Moffett then gets assigned to the very team within the mortgage division where Justin Michael worked. And both of these guys, Justin and David, had dated Angie Verheule. So he was face to face with the guy that he could say, that's the guy that took my girlfriend away from me. Maybe it just kind of picked the scab. Maybe that's when his anger toward Justin Michael began to build.
Love triangles can be dangerous. They involve intense emotions, they involve jealousy, and potentially rage. And so I think any time where you hear that there's a love triangle, it raises the question, is there some sort of emotion or hostility here that's potentially leading to violence?
This connection is most interesting. Knowing that Angie had a relationship with David Moffat has a work relationship with Justin Michael. Is there some type of love triangle gone bad? Jealousy, in my mind, could be the motive here. Jealousy is one of the most destructive emotions. We need to find David Moffat and Angie's ex-boyfriend, Andy Wagner. We need to talk to these guys.
We had to determine if they were involved in the murder of Angie's fiance.
In the murder of Justin Michael, detectives are pursuing 2 new leads from his fiancée Angie's past.
Knowing that Angie had a relationship with David Moffat and Andy Wagner is Angie's long-term ex-boyfriend. We want to dig a little deeper and find out everything we can about them. We're checking if David Moffat has a criminal history. Does he have a weapons permit? While checking on David Moffat, we learned that David Moffat's vehicle was impounded the same night as the homicide. I needed to find out why.
They discover David Moffat had an accident the night of the homicide, approximately 5 miles from Justin Michael's home.
At 3:45, shortly after the homicide, within the same hour, David Moffat's in an accident.
Having David Moffat's name pop up at that time in that location is not something we expected to see.
This is the piece of the puzzle we're looking for.
I was dispatched to that car accident. When I arrived on scene, it was about 0400, about approximately 40 minutes after the homicide took place. On a gravel road, I come up on the red Ford Taurus. It struck this telephone pole. The front end of the car was smashed in. When I give the plate to dispatch and they advise me it belongs to a guy named David Moffat. I don't see anybody in the area. And as soon as I'm starting to get back into my car is when the white male subject comes out of the ditch from the north. And he says, I need help. He said his name was David Moffat. He just said he was out for a joyride and he got in a car accident.
Deputy Tart was aware at this time that 5 miles away, we have an active homicide scene going on. So while not immediately apparent that these two things could be related, it certainly got his suspicion up.
The first thing I noticed is just how much sweat that he's covered in. He's from head to toe covered in sweat. I asked him what he's doing in the Grimes area. At that moment, he became really defensive. I couldn't find insurance on the car, so I made the decision that I was just gonna impound the car. My gut was telling me that he knew more about what was actually happening, about the homicide. So I got all the information that we needed in case we needed to come back and talk to him, which I felt at some point we were probably going to.
David Moffat lives on the other side of the county. He lives 26, 27 miles away from this area. So barring some unusual circumstance, there's really not much reason for him to be over in that area at 4 o'clock in the morning.
This startling new information that places David Moffat both on the timeline and near the crime scene could be the break investigators have been looking for.
Knowing that Angie dated David Moffat and David Moffat's vehicle was impounded the same night of the homicide, is that coincidence? Maybe, maybe not.
There's just too many coincidences that start to stack up in this case. He works with the victim. He's in a motor vehicle collision near the scene of the crime. That creates a nexus that is undeniable and that merits investigation full bore.
So Dave goes from being an interesting character that we need to find out about to the top of our list in very short order.
Detectives head to the scene of David Moffat's car accident, hoping to find evidence that will connect him to Justin's homicide.
We have a lead. We can't get out there fast enough. Searching the area where David Moffett crashed, we found some incredible items. We found a shoebox that contained ear protection, a flashlight, and camo makeup.
So a lot of things that are associated with concealing your identity and committing a crime such as this murder.
As detectives continue to comb through the area, they gather even more crucial evidence.
We also find a gun magazine with ammo. It's Tula ammo. It's a match to the shell casings found at the crime scene. This is a big breakthrough.
But then, detectives make an unexpected discovery.
Along with the magazine, ammo, flashlight was a receipt for an oil change in the name of Andy Wagner.
What in the world is going on here? Andrew Wagner's already on our radar because, he's Angie's ex-boyfriend. We have to figure out how in the world this receipt ends up at the crash scene, where David Moffett's crashed his car.
It just didn't make sense. Did Andy Wagner kill Justin Michael? Did David Moffett kill Justin Michael? Were they in it together?
We've certainly seen collusion in homicide scenes, but, by all accounts, other than the Angie factor that they had both dated her, there's no reason that David Moffett and Andrew Wagner would have crossed paths. We've got to figure out what the connection is between these two.
The discovery of Andrew Wagner's name on a receipt at the scene of David Moffett's car accident, 5 miles from where Justin Michael was killed, has turned the investigation on its head.
These two are tied to this crime scene. Are these two guys working together? Are they working with Angie? I need to do some digging.
While detectives wait on a search warrant for David Moffett's house, they bring Andy Wagner in for questioning.
Andy Wagner and Angie Verheul lived together for 3 years.
When we interviewed Andrew Wagner, he had moved on. He had a new girlfriend.
Andy Wagner said that he was aware that Angie was engaged but did not know to who she was engaged to. We asked Andy Wagner if he knew David Moffett. He did not.
Andy claimed that after their breakup, he didn't stay in contact with Angie.
During interviews, it's very common that people minimize and don't tell the truth.
Andy denies having any involvement in the crime, but detectives press on, looking for answers.
When Andy was asked about a receipt for an oil change in his name, he didn't really have an explanation to why or what had happened to it. He said he recalled getting an oil change and thought that the receipt was still in his vehicle or at home.
When people are interviewed, there's many reasons why they may be evasive. Sometimes they're trying to conceal information which isn't connected to the crime, but maybe portrays them in a negative light. Sometimes they're taken aback and they're confused by the information that they're being presented with, not because they're guilty, but just because that's their way of responding when they're in a stressful situation.
Detectives question Andy about his whereabouts during the time Justin was killed.
Andy had talked about leaving work about 4 p.m. He went home, took care of a couple things, and then ultimately ended up staying overnight at his girlfriend's house.
She lives in another community several miles away. They had gone to dinner that night, and they hung out at home, watched some TV, and went to bed.
With Andy saying he's at his girlfriend's at 9 p.m. and Justin killed at 3:20 a.m., it's still possible that Andy had opportunity to sneak away from his girlfriend's place and kill Justin.
We need to establish that he was in fact at his girlfriend's house. But at this point, Andy Wagner is still high on our list as far as suspects.
In any circumstance where you have two mutually strong suspects, this creates a real dilemma for investigators because at some point you need to begin excluding one of them. So when you have two who can't be excluded, you can't move forward until one or the other is eliminated.
As detectives are wrapping up their interview with Andy Wagner, they received the search warrant for David Moffat's home.
David still lived at home with his parents. He came from a pretty well-to-do family.
We were able to conduct a search at the Moffat residence. No one was home. Anytime you conduct a search, you're gonna look for any kind of evidence that's related to the crime. We're gonna look for weapons, we're gonna look for ammunition, anything that could lead us back to that homicide.
Detectives quickly uncover an important new piece of evidence.
In the basement, we found a bill of sale for a firearm, specifically a 9mm automatic firearm, like the one that is involved in the homicide.
Interestingly, though, on that bill of sale for that 9mm gun, the seller was a gentleman by the name of Drew Ballman, and the purchaser on that bill of sale was Andy Wegner. Why does Andy Wegner's name keep popping up in this case? We got this receipt that we can't really, get a good answer on that's found at the crash site for the oil change. Now we have this bill of sale for a 9mm gun found in David Moffat's basement.
Investigators find Drew Ballman's address on the bill of sale for the gun, and they set off to pay him a visit in the nearby town of Sigourney.
Drew Ballman's the guy that's gonna solve this mystery for us. He's gonna tell us who he saw when he sold a gun, if Andy Wegner went down and bought that gun, or if David Moffat went down and bought that gun.
We met with Drew Ballman, and he had no criminal history. He lived in a small town, was a school teacher. Drew, he was legitimately concerned, very upset, knowing that a weapon that he had sold was involved in a homicide. He was very cooperative.
He was a meticulous record keeper, which was of great value to us. As part of the sale of the weapon, he prepared 2 copies of the bill of sale. So we found the one copy in David Moffat's garbage can. He had an identical copy of that same bill of sale signed by both him and Andy Wegner. The other thing that Drew Ballman gave us, in addition to being a meticulous note taker, he's an avid target shooter. And fortunately for us, he actually had casings that he had fired through the 9mm gun that we believed to be the murder weapon. So we were able to match the bullets from the crime scene where Justin Michael was killed to the bullets that were provided to us by Drew Ballman. Now we know that we have our murder weapon that was sold by Drew Ballman.
Police are one step closer to uncovering the identity of Justin Michael's killer.
We showed Drew a picture of Angie Wegner, and we also showed him a photo lineup with a picture of David Moffat.
David Moffat and Andrew Wegner look very, very similar. Drew Ballman pointed at the first lineup and identified David Moffat, but he also pointed to Andy Wegner.
Drew wasn't 100% sure who he had met with.
Witnesses are really a double-edged sword for any investigator. You rely on witnesses to move an investigation forward, to prioritize certain suspects, to establish a timeline, but at the same time, eyewitness evidence is notoriously unreliable.
With Drew Ballman having ID'd both David and Andy as the purchaser of the gun used to kill Justin Michael, his fiancée Angie is ruled out as a suspect. But even with this promising new lead, the investigation is at a crossroads.
And this case was odd because we couldn't connect the dots. Whoever was committing this crime had the intention of throwing us off base. We don't usually have that, where it's false leads, for lack of a better term.
We're not sure what's going on here, but we're gonna find out who did this.
In the murder of Justin Michael, detectives have 2 suspects on their radar: Andy Wegner and David Moffat. They need to identify which one is the killer. In the nearby town of Sigourney, they have one more piece of evidence to look into. It could be the key to solving the case.
One of the requirements that Drew Ballman had for selling this gun was to make sure that the sale took place in a public place, so it would be recorded should anything go wrong.
One of the receipts that we found at David Moffat's residence was a receipt dated May 4th from a convenience store out of Sigourney, Iowa. A lemonade was purchased along with a candy bar on May 4th at 6:13 hours. So that is the same date and time that Drew Ballman sold the weapon.
Fortunately for us, the inside of that store had a surveillance camera.
Detectives turned to the surveillance cameras in the hopes of spotting David Moffett or Andy Wagner. After scouring hundreds of hours of footage, they find the missing piece of the puzzle.
We were able to positively identify this person as David Moffett. At that point, we knew that David Moffett was the person who purchased the weapon.
The critical value of CCTV or video evidence is that it is an impartial witness. It can provide a historic record of a timeline that is unassailable, that is undisputable, unlike eyewitness testimony that is subject to a lot of problems.
Detectives now know that David Moffett acted alone and was posing as Andy Wagner to buy the gun that killed Justin Michael. They believe he's the killer, but to prove it, they'll need more evidence tying him to the crime.
A second search was conducted at the Moffett residence.
We found there was tool ammo, which was consistent with both the tool ammo found at the primary crime scene, as well as the ammunition provided us by Drew Ballman.
In the bathroom trash, we'd found recon notes that were specifically for Justin Michael's neighborhood. Notes that would indicate certain times that neighbors were home, what time lights came off, things that would put David Moffett there watching at Justin Michael's house. Those notes indicated that David Moffett had put some planning into this.
Then, police come across a possible attempt to conceal evidence.
We'd found a tote in the basement that was not there the previous day. And inside that tote was a laptop computer.
And the red tub also contained about 2 inches of water in the bottom of it. It appeared that it was an attempt to eliminate whatever information was on the computer. Fortunately, our lab gurus were able to get this laptop dried out and in a functioning state. We found a substantial amount of evidence that specifically tied David Moffett to the execution of this crime. The first file that was found on the computer was a forged driver's license that had David Moffett's picture on it, but the license was created in the name of Andy Wagner.
The evidence suggested that David Moffett put a lot of planning into this. And this was all an elaborate ploy to frame Andy Wagner.
So at that point, once we find this computer, it all makes sense. Then Andy Wagner is pretty much exonerated in this case.
One may want to frame someone else, say Andy, for the murder so he won't get caught, and perhaps he wants to get rid of all the competition so that he's either the last person standing for Angie's affections, or he wants to send a message to Angie and everybody that she's been involved with.
Detectives then uncover even more revealing evidence connecting David Moffett to the crime.
Once David's laptop was examined, we were able to look at all the internet web searches that he had made.
You could see during the forensic analysis kind of the beginnings of a search history of David Moffett searching Angie Verheuel, David Moffett, typing in the name Justin Michael, things like that. And then days prior to the homicide, the search history ratcheting up in a sense.
We learned that David Moffett had searched how to commit a murder, what are the confession times at a local Catholic church, and the craziest one was the murderinest murder guide you'll ever need.
The internet searches revealed that David Moffett was trying to get away with murder.
What stands out for me is the clear level of planning and forethought that was invested into committing this crime. This was not a crime of rage. The level of planning and plotting that this takes shows that there's a level of instrumentality here in this offense.
With the evidence now stacked against him, David Moffett is arrested for the murder of Justin Michael.
So when we arrested David Moffett had a blank stare No reaction whatsoever. It was like he'd been caught. Looking over this case, jealousy in my mind is the motive here. And David Moffett was violently jealous.
Detectives are now able to piece together Justin Michael's final 24 hours.
The night Justin Michael was murdered, they had all got home about 10 p.m. and went to bed approximately 11 p.m.
Just after 3 a.m., David Moffett entered Justin Michael's house with murder on his mind.
On the night Justin was killed, the perpetrator was able to make entry through the back deck door. We then believe he went to the front of the house and staged that area to make it look as though it was some type of a burglary that was taking place. But this was not a burglary. This was a targeted attack. David Moffett then came down the hallway, entered the wrong bedroom where Marie Michael was staying. At that point, he realized that that was not the person that he was going after. Moffett then goes across the hall to the master bedroom where Angie and Justin were. Justin's laying in the bed, Angie's laying in the bed, and there's 4 shots that go into Justin. The bullets pass through Justin, through the pillow, through his mattress, and one of the bullets actually passed through the wall and exited the home. The killer was certainly looking for Justin, and the killer got Justin. We believe ultimately the gun had been thrown off a bridge into a lake.
David Moffett's car crash was his fatal error. Looking back now, if he would have never crashed, he might have gotten away with murder.
In July 2015, David Moffett is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
It was absolutely tragic. Justin certainly didn't deserve this. That's what makes this hard. You know, you can't reconcile things like that in your head and have it make any kind of sense. The only reconciliation you get in a case like this is getting a conviction and holding the person responsible.
I really feel for Justin's mother. As a mother myself, I can't imagine losing a child. And so your heart just breaks for her when she's talking about being there the night her son's murdered, and you know, seeing the crime scene is just horrific for any mother. You don't expect to outlive your children ever.
We may never know why David Moffett killed Justin Michael. Was it in hopes that he would get back with Angie, he would get a second chance, or he was just pure evil?